This episode is brought to you in part by Viva Systems. I still manage a lot of the regulatory documents at my sites, and I can't tell you how much of a pain it is to have folders on folders and a absolutely insane-looking desktop because I'm moving documents around all the time. Something I love about Viva Site Vault is you can drag files directly from your email right into Site Vault. Sounds like a small thing, but for someone like me, it makes a huge difference. So I love Site Vault. Really, it's out there to help give research sites one place to work with sponsors, and basically reduce the amount of systems and logins we have to use with our trials. There's already 4,500 sites using Site Vault. There's more than 400 industry sponsors who are using Viva applications. So it's pretty wild that 65% of all trials run on Viva. That's a lot of site sponsors and trials. And the best part, Site Vault's completely free to use. So if you're looking for a good regulatory solution, really a great regulatory solution, the one that's been the easiest and best for us and for me to use, go check out sites.viva.com today. Site Vault is always free for sites. So once again, that's sites.viva.com. This episode is also being brought to you in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site network sponsors, and CROs. Real-time systems allow users to manage complex clinical research processes with powerful user-friendly interfaces that are revolutionizing how research gets done. To get a free demo, check out the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of their contact forms. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Our guest today is Sylvain Berthelot. Sylvain is a senior voice of customer and strategy director at Calyx, one of the leaders in eClinical and regulatory technology. In his role, he aims to transform customer feedback into insights and decisions that will positively impact trial teams, sites, and patients. Sylvain has assumed various roles during his 12 plus years at Calyx. Consistently has kept his focus on reducing burden for sites and patients alike. He's also the host of the podcast Calyx Café, where industry experts talk about clinical research trends, futurology, and best practices to reliably solve the complex in clinical trials. If you haven't checked out Calyx Café, it's probably got the best production quality of any clinical research podcast out there, so definitely go check it out. I will make sure there's a link to it in the show notes. This week, we discussed the often underappreciated role of IRT in clinical trials, the concept of site-approved technology, and the zen of surfing. So without further ado, Sylvain Berthelot. All right, Sylvain, thank you so much for coming on, man.
No, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the show, so it's nice to be on.
Well, and I love, we just talked beforehand. I thought you were in Canada. You're in the UK, so I appreciate it's probably getting towards the end of your day there, if I had to guess.
We're getting towards it, but I still have a couple hours, so all good.
I'm still waking up, and you're starting to wind down, so I like that.
Yeah, it always makes me feel better when I think in the evening that my colleagues in the US are still working. I love that.
Yeah, you can just point and laugh and say, "Ha ha, my day's
yes."
over." Well, I want to jump right in, just like I do with every guest. I think it's always really kind of fun to hear about people's research backstories, if you will. People come into the industry all kinds of different ways, oftentimes by accident. So if you would, just sort of share your origin story. What kind of brought you to the clinical trial space?
So interestingly, it wasn't quite by accident. But I hear that a lot as well. But for me, so I went to uni not really knowing what I wanted to do. Because of that, I wasn't very successful at uni because I didn't have any goal. But I didn't like failing. And one day, having failed very much, I thought, well, I need to find something that I want to do because that's not working. And I found this master's. So it was like something that you start at third year after the baccalaureate in France. So a 3-year formation where There was some bits of project management, a lot of physiological, human physiology, a lot of understanding of the pharmaceutical industry, and some computer programming. All that was done, like it started in the 80s, to have people who can translate what scientists want into a software or a program. So at the time, obviously, the focus was really on programming. But when I did it, it was more focused on project management and being able to understand several parts of what a software should do in a clinical trial. So I did that, and after the masters, I not accidentally went into the pharmaceutical industry. I spent 5 years in preclinical, and then moved to the clinical trials when I joined what was at the time Perceptive Informatics in 2010. So a long time ago now.
Not that long ago.
It feels like it.
Yeah, it sneaks up on you, doesn't it? No, I mean, look, I can relate. I didn't do well in college because I, was an 18-year-old kid and had no idea what I wanted to do at all. So I think it's pretty relatable, actually. But I do find it interesting that you found a program that was, sounds like perfect for kind of what you're doing now, or the role that you kind of got into, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And it was very, very well done because there was a lot of time spent in the industry during those 3 years. Overall, I think out of the 3 years, I probably spent 10 months in the industry. And that was what really taught me a lot. Obviously, then I had my first job. I didn't know how to do it. But still, like spending all this time actually working for the industry while you're still studying was amazing.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know that I'm sure there are programs like that here in the US, but that doesn't ring any bells to me. It seems like that would be something that would be in high demand, or, at the very least, something we need to see more of. We do have a lot of people entering the field still by accident, but, a lot of people coming in kind of completely fresh with no real idea of how the industry works, which is can be problematic to different degrees, right?
Yes, yeah, and I've seen a lot of people like that, yeah, which require a lot of training when they come in.
Yeah, and it must be frustrating too. On the one hand, I appreciate the enthusiasm a lot of people are coming into the industry with and wanting to, change the game or be a disruptor or whatever the case may be. But then it must be frustrating to be like, oh, this is actually really complicated and really hard. And maybe they could have saved themselves some being let down if they had a little more experience on the front end. So, I love that. It looks like you ended up doing some work on the CRO side for a while there, yeah?
Yes, I did. So, well, Perceptive Informatics became Parexel Informatics. So I think when I joined, actually, we'd just been acquired by Parexel, and Calyx became Calyx from splitting from Parexel at the beginning of 2020. No, sorry, 2021. So I spent more or less 11 years within Parexel, which for me was like it really gave me the opportunity to see different aspects of the what we do for a clinical trial. But then I also saw that the vision from a CRO is a certain vision, and that sponsors will have a different vision. Thankfully, they meet somewhere. But it's very interesting when you start, like in my role now, I spend a lot of time interviewing sponsors and end users, and you get that people come from different angles, and then you understand why sometimes there are conflicts because not everyone sees it in the same way as the others. So yeah, it's very interesting, and I love our industry for that because we have such a noble role in society, but we don't all go about it in the same way. Although we all try to achieve the same thing, there are so many different ways that people approach this goal that we're all aiming for. It makes it, yeah, even more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've pointed out a lot is that, I mean, there's so many roles contained. Like, if whatever you love, there's something in the clinical trial industry you can, relate to, or I think get on board with, because to your point, it's we're all working towards the same thing, but there's such a breadth of different things to do within the industry, which, is good and bad. Obviously, again, I love that once you're in, you can kind of chart your own path depending on what your passion might be, and still be contributing to this sort of bigger goal. But to your point, and I'm seeing this more and more as, like you, I start talking to more people across different segments of the industry, is that there's so many conflicts and there's so much sort of disconnect sometimes between the different stakeholders, between, I'm at a site, but it's between me and a CRO or me and a sponsor. But then you also see, to your point, CRO and sponsor is also having their own different ways of doing things. So you start adding up all these different gaps and it becomes really, really challenging and really complicated. I mean, sometimes I feel like, what hope do we have? Like, how can we start like better coming together, or sort of better getting everyone on the same page? I mean, what can we do? What can we do?
But yeah, I mean, I see that every day, and that you're probably familiar with what IRT systems do. So essentially, I'll explain for those who are not familiar, but we manage randomization into a clinical trial, and we raise shipments to the depot for each site so that sites don't run out of medication and have the right kits for their patients. And that's the core of what IRT does. There are other things, but so this is a system that sites use a lot. And it has such specific functions that when things go right, the site should be in the system and out again within 3 minutes. So, from a sponsor's point of view, there's not much to show or tell about the system. It does what it's meant to be doing. And I've been in situations where it was just, okay, we need an IRT. Like, it's not a focus of we need to fill specific needs. It's more of a, oh yeah, we need this thing. And you have to explain, like educate the buyers essentially why they should care about their IRT being of good quality, because obviously if you don't randomize properly, you couldn't blind the trial, you could miss those patients. Like there's a lot that can go wrong that is covered by IRT. So like in this role that I've had, like I've had several roles at Calyx, but like through all my roles, I've seen that we have to educate who's buying the system, but at the same time, we need to make sure that what we do is good, a good fit for end users, so site users who are not the buyers. So we need to care, and it's like it's difficult sometimes to sell something that the buyer doesn't see and doesn't use, and they may not necessarily see the point in caring about how sites can benefit from a system like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've been pretty keen to now for a while, is the disconnect between buyer and user, right? Which I think
Mm-hmm.
trickles down into a lot of interesting issues. But IRT specifically is an interesting one to me. I know when we first started talking, I was sort of like, huh, IRT is like, I guess you don't think about it that much from the site level. I mean, I guess that's a good thing, right? That means it
Yeah.
works, because, I mean, I can tell there are clear differences between some of the systems, but unless it's not working, it's almost, you're just like you said, you're in and out within, a couple of minutes, you're done. Your drug shows up when it needs to. It spits out the right, numbers that match up to a kit somewhere, and
Mm-hmm.
it all works. But there are certainly differences between the systems, how easy they are to use, and how much, also just sort of how much useful data they can give you as a site. I mean, What sort of sets Calyx apart, like from your experience from other IRTs? Because I think sometimes it can be tricky for sites to know, like, oh, well, who cares? They're all just kind of the same.
Interesting question. So, from a site's point of view, what we try to do is to give access to the tasks that sites need to do. So, what's interesting in an IRT is that you know the dispensing visit schedule. So, based on when a patient was randomized, you know when they're meant to be coming, give or take 3 days for the next visit. So you can actually like start showing to the sites what's coming next. And like what's key for us is like this being in and out within 2 minutes. Like it's giving access to the functionalities they need straight away so that they can really be going, okay, you need to dispense this and that's it. Then I come out of the system. But then there are aspects as well that sites don't see. And what I love about what like IRT and what we do in the industry is that sometimes we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort so that people don't see what's happening. Uh, so we deal with situations where, say, like a sponsor has their manufacturing plan, but a batch is delayed and the current medication is about to expire. Well, that's where we spend a lot of time working with the clinical supply manager to find solutions to make sure that sites can still use the medication, that they can still dispense patients. But at the end of the day, where we're successful if the sites don't even realize that this is going on.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah. To the site, everything looks like business as usual, which
Yeah.
that'd be a success at that point.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that. The fact that you can spend a lot of time doing things so that people don't see what you're doing.
Yeah. No. Again, I don't think that's. Yeah, I like that nuance. I've never thought about it that way. And again, even to your point, something that maybe is as simple as getting a visit window when you dispense a kit is, I mean, that's great for a site. If I can not have to go do a calculation on my own and
Mm-hmm.
only to find out later, I go to dispense a kit and it's like, oh, you're a day out of window. Well, crap. Why didn't you tell me that before? Why,
Yeah.
why couldn't I know that beforehand? Which is the case with a lot of, IRT systems out there. Something as sort of simple as that could be a huge advantage for a site, avoiding protocol deviations and avoiding misdosing and things like that. Again, simple but elegant. I love that.
Yeah. 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 And we do a lot of work working with sites directly, which like considering they're one of the key actors in the clinical trials, they interact with patients. For me, that's how we help patients in a way, because IRT doesn't touch patients directly, but if we help sites get it faster, then we help patients in a way. That's the way I see it. So yeah, we spend a lot of time like interviewing end users to make sure that the way we build the system is useful, that we display the right information, that we give access, as I said earlier, to the right functionalities. And that's something that, so I'm a big dreamer. Like I'm an idealist. And I'd love to see something in our industry, for example, where like you could put a label on your piece of technology that says that it's been approved by sites, for example.
Yeah, no, I love this, and I've talked about this for a while. There's just a lack of, I don't want to say it's lack of transparency, but it's a lack of communication, like between, because sites talk to each other, but there's not a lot of public information, and certainly not a lot of public conversation, because I guess people are afraid to speak badly of different technology solutions. But I think we do need more of that, because if a CRO or sponsor doesn't know that a particular vendor is just terrible, I mean, it's hurting sites, it's hurting patients, it's hurting their studies. So if we could come together in some way to say like, look, these are good solutions that we want, and these are bad solutions that we don't want anymore, which I think, to your point, would encourage more companies to work directly with sites, because you can tell from a site level what's been built without any site input.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty easy to tell, like, oh, this is not for me. This is for the CRO or sponsor, even though I'm the one who has to use it. So I love that idea. I mean, I'm curious what that would look like, because many patients have no idea what they're using. If I hand them an e-diary, they don't know what the company is. They don't know who it's coming from. It's, in a lot of ways, becomes more of a reflection on the site, because all they know is the site. I'm giving them this old Android phone with one app on it that doesn't open up half the time. It crashes and it won't connect to their Wi-Fi. And they think that's me doing that. And it's not. It's an ePro vendor, right? So
Yeah.
that education isn't there. And then, to your point, like, how could we all come together and say, like, yes, this is a good solution or a bad solution? I mean, I love that idea. I think it would be, I mean, how practical do you think that could be to try to pull off?
I think it starts with your research. So, like, if you have interviewed sites in the process, or even like an e-diary, you could work with patients, and hopefully e-diary vendors work with patients. And then I think there would need to be some sort of validation with the sites as well of the end product. And if you've spent this amount of time developing it with the sites and get some sort of stamp that a site or several sites have used a beta version of your system, and that you've taken into account their feedback, then you could have a site approved label. I mean, you could do the same with patients. I think with patients, it becomes a bit more difficult, but involving end users in the validation of your system is something that should be part of the process, in my opinion.
Well, I think, to your point too, a way to sort of standardize and validate that process, rather than just saying like, we talked to a patient, they liked it,
Mm-hmm.
like, make it more stringent and, follow some standard process, so that, I think, again, to your point, it would be good to know, probably not just from the site side, but from a customer, CRO, or sponsor would want to know, if a vendor has gone through that. I mean, I have to think that affects the success of their trials, maybe more than they can appreciate. I know that if I'm using a system in a trial and it's terrible, and I mean, I'm just a lot less likely to focus on that trial, because it's a bad experience for me and for the patient. And again, I think that sometimes may be very underappreciated by sponsors and CROs. If I say, hey, your eDiary sucks, we can't get it to work, the patients hate it, and they're like, too bad, use it. And I'm said, well, I got 5 other studies, so I'm going to go work on those, because patients want to be in them and they're easier to work with. I mean, again, I think maybe that isn't being appreciated enough.
No, and it's terrible to even get to a point that you think like that. But I completely get why you would, because if a system is taking too much of your time, is not working, is making patients reconsidering taking part in a trial, then why bother? But do you think so? At your end, do you think you can influence sponsors? Like, are they listening now to sites or not?
It's hard to say. I will say that there appear to be more sponsors, CROs, vendors reaching out and trying to engage sites. It's hard for me to tell if that's having any real effect. I mean, I certainly have not had any sponsors come to me and say, hey, we're trying to choose between these vendors. Who do the sites like? I mean, I haven't had that level of engagement, but more of like vendors saying like, hey, can we bounce some ideas off of you? We'd like to do this or that or the other. So it's getting a little bit better, but I think it's hard to see yet if it's having any real practical effect on what's happening or what vendors are being chosen. I still think that probably a lot of this it's very opaque to sites. We don't know how they choose. Do they choose because it's cheap? Do they choose because they have a relationship with the salesman from the vendor side? We have no idea why they pick the vendors that they do. And sometimes it's sometimes I can't imagine why they would pick some of the vendors because they're just terrible to work with. So I guess in some ways I'm cautiously optimistic that there seems to be more conversation, but it's hard to get too excited until we see something a little more real. I'd love to see sponsors say, hey, who's your favorite ePro? Again, ePro is just one that is particularly challenging because it involves us and the patient working together, to sort of get those done. So I lean on that one a lot, but that's just one example. I'd love to see more sponsors say, did you like using Clario? Did you like using Y Prime? Who should we use the next time? Who would you recommend? But I've not seen that yet at this side.
Yeah, that would be a very good way to approach it, because they obviously, so the sponsors will use the part of the systems as well, and they will ask their end users, like, how was it for you? So why not ask other end users, even if they're not in your organization? There's something that frustrates me actually, because like when you look at the industry in general, there's a lot of focus in making the life of employees easier, like caring for your own employees, which I think is great. But then sponsors have this role of selecting systems that you use on a daily basis. So, like, they should also look to make your life easier, and the patient's life easier.
Right.
And I know there's this thing about decentralization being the holy grail of making it easier for patients, but I don't really see it as being this wholesome solution.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's being a little oversold at this point, probably. I think it's going to have a much more narrow application than sort of what it's being made out to be. There's still going to be, you can't be doing trials with colonoscopies and surgeries and, a lot of, unless they just completely change how clinical trials are done, which I don't, this is not an industry that historically makes big sweeping changes over short periods of time. So I don't anticipate that being the case. So no, I mean, for the foreseeable future, I mean, most patients are going to come through clinical trial sites. So, I mean, I'm with you. I think it's interesting. The relationship, is complicated. Like, I sometimes feel, we're sort of like independent contractors, but we need to be more partnered versus contracted. You know what I mean? Because if your drug getting approved relies on sites enrolling patients in trials,
Yeah.
and you can't do it without them.
No.
Sites love their patients. We're walking these people through their journey of a clinical trial. I mean, we bust our asses to work with them and help them. So make it easier. Make it easier for all of us. Just talk to sites. We've done 100 trials over the last few years. We've worked with 7 different ePro vendors. We've got a lot of experience, like working with different systems. So, I mean, and we're not even that big. So go talk to some of these sites. They'll tell you who they like to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I was talking to a site pharmacist not so long ago who told me, I use 10 IRT at the moment because of all the studies we work on. And I can't start imagining having to use 10 different email systems. So, like, for me, it's completely alien, actually, because I use, like, the same systems over and over again. But having to use 10 different systems in the same week to do the same thing, it's a weird concept in a way.
I mean, it is, but unfortunately, it's almost sad that it's become just the standard, what we deal with at the sites. You start a new study and you're like, okay, who are my 7 vendor systems I'm going to have to log into? Just make a list. Let's get them figured out. And it's going to be different. Even within the same sponsor, there's different vendors being used. So, it's just unnecessarily complex. I mean, at least from our perspective, it's unnecessarily complex. I guess somebody's got a good reason for doing it this way. Somebody somewhere has a good reason for doing it this way.
Yeah. Not me.
Right. Well, and yeah, to your point, you wouldn't use Gmail and Hotmail and Outlook and 6 different email systems. You would use one because you're not an insane person.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, again, it's very challenging. But no, I love the idea of having some mechanism by which you can say, look, patients and sites have vetted this software or solution and they like it. I mean, do you think that should be done like outside or just like independently, that should possibly be taken on by maybe some sort of site consortium or some other movement? I mean, there's no reason that couldn't be done like independently of any vendor or sponsor. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, even if, so for example, thinking about myself, I'm very interested in doing something like this. I'd like to be involved, not necessarily to influence the output and like make sure that Calyx would be voted higher than others, but just to have the process in place. And I think you're right that having a consortium of sites, maybe other users, or I don't know what it would look like, but having this group that would review that a certain piece of software functionality has been validated by sites. And it shouldn't be something that is very difficult to do, like for that consortium. Just sharing some, I don't know, a validation report or something like that. And then you have your site approved label. And then a sponsor could still go, no, I don't want to use that. But then it's their choice. And I think it becomes more obvious which vendors make the effort and care about their end users more than others. It's a bit like buying eggs that don't say free range. You can still do it. It's your choice.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, at least you've created some sort of standard to start picking through the the various vendors out there. Because again, it feels like kind of the Wild West. It's very chaotic in terms of, especially now, where there are all kinds of new vendors coming into the scene, and nobody knows if they're good, bad, or good or bad. Just hard. It's hard to know. So no, I love that.
Yeah, yeah, and like there's so much innovation you can do as well. So like vendors end up not differentiating this much from one another, and sometimes what makes sponsors select a certain vendor is not what they do better than others. It's what they get right and that others get wrong. So yeah, I don't know if we're going to see this change in the future. I mean, when I joined IRT, there were probably 5 key IRT vendors, and that was all. Now we're getting towards the 20 mark. And we all do the same thing. Like, I mean,
Right.
yeah, we have some differentiators, but the core of IRT is the same across all vendors, same as EDCs do all the same thing.
Right. Well, it sounds like 10 or so years ago, there was a lot of consolidation because, I remember a lot of these IRT vendors who have all disappeared and rolled up underneath, some other company. But now it's like happening all over again. Now there's more. Do you think there will be another round where they all start to consolidate to some degree?
Possibly. I mean, it's very hard to tell, but I don't I don't expect there to be much more new vendors because it's going to become not worth the investment if the market share between vendors gets tiny.
Yeah. Well, I have to think that's already a concern to some degree because, again, I mean, yeah, how many do you need? How many do you need? I guess competition's good, but at some point, I mean, someone's got to go away, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, fair enough. I want to shift gears a little bit, if you're okay with that. Something I like to ask all my guests. What's maybe a tool or a resource or something you use kind of in your everyday life? It doesn't have to be research related, but something that kind of makes you, helps you be the best you can be. It can be anything. Again, book, podcast, I don't know, exercise, breathing techniques, anything. What's a resource or something you use that's really invaluable to you?
That's an amazing question. So for me, I'll reply with two things that are related but kind of different. Exercise and nature. And I try to combine both as much as possible. I love running, so being outdoors, running really helps me get some space in my head. And it's not unusual for me to start a run feeling stressed, and then suddenly during my run, I'll find a solution to a problem I wasn't even thinking about.
Right.
And then you get home and you're like, oh yeah, no, that's good. That did me good. So yeah, those are the two things that really help me personally in life, but also work-wise. I think it's very important to take some time to exercise and yeah, just take some time off, even if it's just 10 minutes away from the screen, just to go for a quick walk. That does a lot of good.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of things in that space that are sort of just create a little bit of a meditative quality where, to your point, you just kind of shut your brain off and you're doing something physical which requires some attention, so your brain stops having a bajillion random thoughts that it's oftentimes having throughout the course of a busy work day.
Yeah.
And it just allows you to find a different, find a little bit of a flow state, a little meditative state where you can calm down. And I'm very guilty of having to remind myself of that when I'm stressing out throughout the day, and I'm like, okay, we need to step away and do something physical, or again, being in nature. To your point, is great, and just sort of like has a way of slapping you in the face and making you stop and re-examine things a little bit. So I love that. And again, I think very undervalued, especially when I spend way too much time staring at a computer screen.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. You said slap in the face. So I started surfing last year, which is not something I was expecting to start in my 40s, but hey. And it's this like thinking about sometimes, because the surf in the UK is better in winter when there's storms.
Sure.
And so a lot of the times when you can actually go surfing, it's when the water's cold, outside is cold. And often when I get in the water, I'm thinking, why am I doing this to myself? Especially when you get that first wave that slaps you in the face. But then once you're in it, it's so amazing, and yeah, you fully decompress. So yeah, like kicking yourself, making yourself do it is sometimes the most difficult part of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's sort of like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Wim Hof and, cold submersion. I mean, yeah, that's a big, interesting thing to me too. It can definitely change your headspace. And, but to your point, you have to force yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit sometimes to get the benefit that comes along with doing hard things. Right. I mean, I think there's some real beauty in that. Well, fair enough. Where can people find you online?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So Sylvain Berthelot on LinkedIn. They can also find Calyx Café, my podcast, on Spotify. I think we're on Apple and other streaming platforms. And we also have our own site where we store the podcast. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put all your info in our show notes, but definitely go check out Calyx Cafe, the ridiculously awesome production on that.
Thank you.
I think really unparalleled. Yeah. You're really trying to put us all to shame with your production quality, but I appreciate that.
That's not the initial goal.
No, I know, but again, you guys do a really nice job. I do appreciate the aesthetic, and I think it's really cool to see that, because we don't have a lot of that. I mean, there's not a lot of content and useful content creation in the space anyway, but so I can appreciate the extra effort to put some nice aesthetics in there. But
thank you.
No, look, I really appreciate you coming on. You have any kind of final words as we wrap up?
Well, I think we've had a very good discussion and love this topic. I think we should carry on the discussion to see if we can do something about getting those site-approved labels at some point.
Yeah, I love that. We'll definitely talk offline, and I've got some possible thoughts towards that because I think there'd be some real interest in that too from a big segment of the industry. So, all right, well, Sylvain, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure you'll be back before we know it.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
As always, thank you so much for listening to the Note to File podcast. Make sure to check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for episode transcripts, show notes, as well as links to our guest contact information. Thanks, guys.